Friends, this is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. A few housekeeping notes, as always. If you're a listener of this podcast, you're going to hear me say the same things a lot, but it's mostly my chance to plug some of my stuff, if you'll allow me. But just two quick websites. You can go to carterwilson.com. You can check out my website and my recent release, Tell Me What You Did, which is... by the time this comes out, I can say that it's a Barnes & Noble pick, our monthly pick for Barnes & Noble for February 2025. So hopefully you've seen it in stores, but check out that website. And if you're an aspiring writer or a writer who's struggling or a writer who wants to just talk about the career of writers, go to my website, Unbound Writer. That's unboundwriter.com. And there I offer one-on-one coaching. I have self-guided online classes. You can see what offerings I have in terms of upcoming retreats or seminars. And you'll also see there that you can book a free 30-minute consultation with me. Jump on Zoom, tell me what's going on with your writing life, and we can see if there's a way we can work together. So zero risk. So if that's something that appeals to you, make sure to check that out. All right, friends. So today on the show, I had somebody I've gotten to know a little bit since last year, Meredith Lyons. So Meredith, we talked about it a little bit in the podcast. I've just gotten to know a little bit through conferences. So I saw her at Thriller Fest last year and at BoucherCon as well. She was a debut novelist last year with her book, Ghost Tamer, which went on to get all sorts of critical acclaim, lots of awards, some great stuff. And so she had a very exciting debut book, which is amazing. And, you know, it wasn't her first book that she wrote. We talk about that a little bit too, but it was the first one that was published. And her upcoming book, which is publishing in April, is called A Dagger of Lightning. So this is more fantasy than her last book was. And potentially Dagger of Lightning might be the first in a series of books. So she's kind of had that experience writing kind of different-ish genres and kind of going through a publishing process with two different titles, and actually going through a publishing process with the same publisher, but the publisher was sold between books 1 and 2. So she talks a little bit about her experience kind of going through a second launch with a different ownership group of her publisher. So it was pretty interesting to listen to. And, you know, to me, this conversation felt like old friends catching up. So it went a little bit long, but I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I love the conversation. I think you all too. This is my chat with Meredith Lyons. I see your snarky picture.
And I'm wearing the same shirt, so it works.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that. I've taught classes where the show's made out the photo. I'm like, it's the same fucking whole outfit.
I know. Well, you get like certain outfits that work for things and you just repeat them, and it just makes it less stressful.
Well, what I realize is most of the time I'm in sweats. And I can't really wear that. So, and you find like, oh yeah, there's that one outfit that looks kind of authory, whatever the hell that even means.
Yeah.
So,
I just bought a bunch of ghost t-shirts for like any conference I go to, and I just wear a different ghost t-shirt every day.
Smart. Nothing wrong with ghost t-shirts. Are you doing a lot of conferences?
I did as many as I could like the last couple years, because Ghost Tamer came out in 2023 and then the paperback released in 2024. So I was still eligible. And since it was September, I was like on the back end of a lot of debut things. So I felt like I was debuting after I'd kind of already been out a year.
Right.
So yeah.
It's smart. And you're Nashville, right? You're Nashville?
Yes.
If I recall. And you won the Silver Falcon Award at the Nashville conference. That's amazing. So you were in your hometown and you're having all this like debut experience that don't let it go to your head, because that shit ain't gonna last.
I know. Well, I'll be really humble. I expected to win Best Supernatural. I didn't expect to win Best Book of 2023.
That's amazing.
So that was...
Where does that confidence come from?
The best.
Well, and it's a sincere question because it's
I just,
not only is it good, you should have confidence because most authors don't, and that's the issue is the extreme lack of self-confidence amongst most authors
oh, I
really
do have a
limit
lot
them.
of lack of self-confidence in a lot of things, but like I had already won the Ben Franklin and the Ippy like gold for this book.
Got it.
So when we came into this one, I was like in my head, not to other
Right.
people. I was like,
Right. I can't possibly
probably.
lose because look at my track record.
I was like, probably I will win. It's
Yeah.
like, probably I will win. But I was like, cool, I got my little medal. Yay, I'm one of the cool kids now.
Yeah.
And then I won the big one. And I was like, oh, that I did not expect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's back up a little bit. So you and I know each other a little bit. We got to know each other at I guess Thriller Fest really because we
Yeah, we
sat
sat
next to
next to each other. Unfortunately, I left before the rats arrived.
yeah. So we sat at this dinner for debut authors, and you were a debut at the time.
I'm
And
still a debut until April 1st.
okay, got it. Yep. Technically, that's how it works. Yeah, because that's when your next book comes out.
Yeah.
And we sat at this dinner outside that was infested by rats in New York City. And at some point, you were crashing hard, and you needed food, and you had
Yeah.
about 10 bites of food. And you're like, I'm out of here.
I ate all of my food. I just ate it in like 10 seconds because I was so hungry. I
It was a
get
long
like
day.
it's one of those things where I'm an introvert, but I'm on the line so I can turn it on,
Yeah,
but I go from 60 to 0
yeah,
like really fast. And I feel like we were waiting a long time to get sat, and then they had us pick the food in advance. And so we're like, well, we're going to get sat and the food will appear. And that did not happen.
yeah,
And so by the time it came, me and KT Win were just like,
yeah.
peace.
Totally.
Yeah, sorry if
Um,
I was grumpy in any way, but yeah, I definitely
no,
was.
no, I get, and it's funny. I'm probably a little bit like you, but I lean extrovert. But I definitely like when I'm alone in my hotel room or alone at home. I'm like, this is pretty nice.
Yeah, I
um,
always recommend people like, get the hotel room if you can, so you can go stare at the wall for a few minutes if you need to.
yeah, totally. And conferences in general. While we're talking about it, I mean, it's and you've obviously have now a lot of experience going to conferences. It's such a great thing. It's such a
Yeah,
necessary thing, but it's also very difficult because a lot of authors are introverts and they're like all that human energy just shuts them down after like 10 minutes. They're like, I need to go just chill.
right. Or
So
you're over examining like how you how people perceive you when really
no one's thinking about you at all.
exactly.
Well, and it's very because I remember. I mean, I went to Thriller Fest way before I was published. I had written stuff that never sold, and I had an agent, but I didn't know anybody. And it is very intimidating because you go there, and the knee jerk is just to stand by yourself with a drink in your hand and feel like an idiot. And then you go to the panels and stuff like that. That's all good, but it's very hard to socialize. But once you do, you realize like, oh, these are the nicest people in the world.
Yeah, everyone's
And
super nice.
yeah, and with a debut, you have a built-in kind of a class that you make connections with, and what it was probably 25, 30
There
people
was
or
a
something like
lot
that.
in our
Yeah,
class.
yeah,
Like I felt like we were huge.
yeah, yeah. So where did you grow up in Tennessee?
I grew up in New Orleans and
Oh,
then
that's
I
right. Oh,
moved,
you were LSU.
yeah,
That's right, because my son's at LSU.
yes,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Tigers. Which mic are they on now?
And my agent's in New Orleans, and she's like, there are people skiing on Bourbon Street right now.
Dude, that snow was, it's, I was like, it's beautiful, global warming.
Right. No, 100%.
I,
And not equipped to deal with it at all.
oh no, they just stayed at home. I remember four snows when I lived there. And I lived there until I was 18 and then went to LSU, and they were like an inch, maybe.
Yeah.
Like that was, they had nine
Yeah,
inches.
it's crazy. It's crazy. Um, so what did you study? I know you got 2 degrees at LSU. What did you get?
Yeah. Theater, very
Uh-huh.
important.
Uh-huh.
And mass communications with a concentration in electronic media, all of which is obsolete by now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
But the
yeah,
theories were probably there.
yeah. I was one credit away from getting a minor in Latin, and I was like, no, I am done with the useless degrees.
Right.
Let
Yeah.
us let
Well,
us leave.
theater because you wanted to be an actor.
Yes. Yeah. And then I ran away to Chicago and did that for 17 years.
That's so interesting because I just interviewed another writer who she didn't stick with acting as long as you did. It was maybe 5 years and just grew very frustrated just by the whole world of it
Yeah.
all, the audition process, the constant rejections, which, let's shift to writing because that's totally different.
Yeah. It is a little different. I will say the flavor of rejection is a bit different,
It's well written.
in my opinion. Because when you have your book, in my opinion, it stings more with writing, but maybe that's because I did acting more. Because when you're acting, they'll reject you and you can be like, I had an off day. They're looking for a blonde. They're
Right,
looking for someone younger. So many reasons. When you have your book, it's like, this is the perfectest I can get this.
right, right.
And you send off your heart, and then multiple people send you form rejections.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was her comment too, is like when you're auditioning, they're rejecting uncontrollables. Like you said, they need a blonde or they need someone taller or whatever it is. And obviously it's hugely
And
personal.
chemistry with the other people and
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
totally. But you did it for 17 years. And then what were your highs and lows of all that?
Um, I mean, it was similar to writing, like really great community. The better difference with book people is like I can publish a book. Congratulations on your recent release, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Like I can release a book and you can release a book and we can both read each other's books and we can both have those books come out at the same time. If I'm acting in a play and you're acting in a play, we can't see each other's plays. We
Right,
can't go support each other's plays. We can't get the same part in
right.
a play,
Totally.
but we can both write thrillers. We can both, so it's a supportive community, but also a little more competitive because there's
Right.
only so many
By
spots to go
nature.
around.
Right,
Yeah, by nature.
right.
But I mean, I enjoyed the community. I enjoyed the people. Chicago's got great people, terrible weather.
Yeah,
And then there was a point at which I was like, this is taking more than it is giving.
yeah.
I want to take a break, and the break is still happening.
Right. Well, yeah, you get older and I don't know. I don't know the best way to put it, but you're certainly your perspective around the need to support yourself, support a potential family, that all crystallizes much more.
Right.
But which is a little bit of a shame too, because sometimes you're a little forced to discard something that you're passionate about. And only after I started writing did I come back and realize like, oh, you don't have to. If this is what you're meant to do, it'll work
Right.
out, but there are a lot of doubts involved. But I feel like people who have this creative impulse to perform, it manifests itself one way or another.
Yeah.
So
Like
it's
in
not
some
like you
kind of,
quit theater and like, oh, let me go get my CPA.
no, I was already kind of writing in the background the whole time.
Yeah.
And like my husband's now at improv in Nashville and he's like, "Do you want to come take a class?" And I'm like, "I'm happy writing. Like I'm cool. I don't miss it right now." There was a time when it was hard because it was so much of my identity was being an actor. But I think that's also kind of society. Like if you don't do something forever, then you are failed.
Right.
Like, I stopped acting, so I'm a failed actor. It's like, no, I was done.
Yeah.
I did it, experienced it, and I was done.
Right.
And now I'm doing this.
Right. It's
And
like a professional athlete. At some point, I'm going to hang up the cleats and do something else.
right.
That
And I
doesn't,
was a boxer and I got hit by a car and separated my shoulder. And I was like, you know what? I
right.
think I'm done.
Right. But that's a real part of your life that you have pride over and probably informed a lot of your writing, I would assume.
I
How
do
could,
like writing fight scenes.
I mean, how could it not though? Like, we talk about this a lot on the podcast about failure and rejection and other careers that didn't go anywhere and things like that. And it's always framed so negatively as opposed to, you had to do that in order to do this.
Right.
Sometimes that's hard to see, but I'm a big believer in that. I believe that that's all feeding your subconscious one way or another, and it's all coming out. Had you not gone through this and had this wonderful career as an actor, you might not have ever written a book.
Right. My dialogue definitely wouldn't be what it is.
Yeah, for sure, which is no joke because there's a lot of bad dialogue out there. And you just, and it's, I don't know if you can study that. It's, you have to have, because I kind of pride myself on dialogue. Like I
Yeah,
love dialogue, and I think you
samesies.
just have to have an ear. Um, it might be a little bit more difficult because you tend to write more the fantastic, which
Hmm.
you can have more rules or your own way of doing things, but I think that would make it harder for something like dialogue where you're like, what, as opposed to I'm always very real world based. And so I'm like, I've got a lot of examples of dialogue in my head
Well,
that
I
I,
think even in like a fantasy like book, your characters are real to you.
right,
So once you figure out what their curse words are,
right,
you
right,
know.
right. Oh, that's a good point. Right. That's just that their vernacular that they use it the same way we would. Um, so you finished acting
Mhm.
and you had already been writing. And what was your journey to actually writing that first novel? And was the first novel that you wrote Ghost Tamer, or was it something else?
Wouldn't it be so annoying if I was like, yes, I pooped out Ghost Tamer and got published?
No, I've
Has
heard that
anyone ever?
before. I'm kind of numb to that because that's not uncommon, but it's more common that.
Really? I've never heard anyone, never, I have not yet met anyone who the first book they wrote ended up being the one that they published with. So, my journey, I was writing kind of peripherally. I wrote little articles online for CBS Local and things like that about martial arts or whatever. And then I was a kickboxing instructor, took a break from acting, and one of my bosses, he was a jerk, took 5 of my classes away with no warning. And I went into this like self-doubt depression thing and decided I will take a writing class
Hmm.
and better myself for whatever reason. And so I started writing in this class and I was depressed, but was doing the assignment. And she was like, well, what are you working on? I was like, well, I wrote something different. She's like, maybe you should stick with one thing.
Mhm.
And I was like, nah. And then I was like, okay, well, I will try. And so I wrote this whole book, not in the class, but after the class was done, I finished it. I stuck with it. I wrote this whole book and then moved to Nashville. I was editing it by myself. So I was writing in a vacuum.
Right.
And then my grandmother died, left me some money that I didn't expect. And I was like, I'm going to do something that she would want me to do. So I was like, I'm going to go to
Oh,
a writing conference and I'm going to buy all the things. So I went to like the Kentucky Women's Writer Conference, which was like a drive, and it was 2018, and I bought like the one-on-one with the agent. I bought like the special workshop class. I went to all the panels, and this is my first writing conference. And I go and I've got all my stuff, and I'm like gonna get an agent. I'm gonna get published, right? And I'm gonna make $1 million. And so I go, and the first panel I go to, first I locked my keys in my car in the parking lot and had to call. So anyway,
yeah.
started with a bang, but my first panel, they're saying like, okay, these are the common pitfalls that people do. And I hit all of them. And I was sitting in the thing going, oh, I did that thing. So then conference goes on, but I'm learning stuff. You forget like once you've done it for a while, like the stuff that you learned. Like, I don't know. I always feel like an amateur, but when I think back on this, I'm like, yeah, I did learn stuff. Then I had my meeting with the agent, and she was like, okay, this is a prologue that you put in to make it exciting because your opening is very boring. And I said, yeah, I learned that in the panel.
Yeah.
But she gave me some feedback, and I was like, great. This feedback is amazing. I have never had feedback before. And everything she's saying, and I was actually inspired by it.
Right.
So I got home and I'm like, I need to find other writers.
Right.
And I got on
So
meetup.com
necessary.
and I found a group, got on a writers group. We worked on that book all through the pandemic, decided it needed another POV, started writing the new POV. Everyone's like, these pages are so much better. And I looked back and I realized, oh shit, I'm a better writer now. I would have to rewrite this whole book.
Yeah.
And so I shoved it in a drawer and started something new.
Yeah. Totally. Which is so good to know and to have that self-awareness, because the tenacity to write often becomes a tenacity to not let go.
Mm,
And that's a real struggle. When people ask me about my 3 books that never sold, they're like, how can you? I'm like, well, because they didn't fucking sell. Like if I look back on it, I would feel the same as you. It's like, first of all, I've got other stories I want to tell.
right.
Secondly, like, I would have to gut this thing,
Yeah. And it's
and
like
I
it
don't want
served
to
a
do that.
purpose. Thank you for teaching me to write, you know.
Right. Totally. And also your experience kind of having that realization about I need to surround myself with other writers and objective readers is so necessary because
Yeah.
that becomes a very difficult part of a writer's life, I think, because you 100% have to have that feedback. Your goal is
Yes.
eventually to show this to somebody else. So why would you not want critical feedback? But then becomes the journey of like, okay, what advice is good advice?
Yeah, and it takes a while to sort that out.
Yeah.
With Ghost Tamer, I had a 20-person Zoom meeting. I was in this long form writers group,
Oh,
20 people on Zoom for an hour. And so, of course, they wanted to get their points in.
right,
So it became like they said good things too, but it was basically like ripping the book apart for an
right,
hour.
right,
And so I was like, thank you very much. And then went and cried and put Ghost Tamer in a drawer for a while, for months. I was like, well, that's done.
right.
And wrote
Yeah,
another book. And then, but, but later, of course, I pulled it out later and I was like, okay, some of this feedback is good and I can take that now.
right,
And some of this feedback is they just would have written a different book.
right,
And I
right.
think parsing that out is a learned skill.
It 100% is. And this and critiquing is a learned skill too, because a lot
Yes.
of people who critique say you should do this as so like I get feedback from my editor, for example, the editorial letter, and it's always like this is how it made me feel. I feel like I needed more of this character, but she never tells me what to do. She just tells me how she received it emotionally.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's good feedback
Yeah.
because it gives me the authority to either say yes or no and to make my own decisions. And then people want to tell you the same thing with classes, like they want to tell you rules. And if I were to take a class, I'd be like, yeah, everything you just said, I've broken every one of those rules.
Right.
So it's hard to figure out like what is the real thing to do and what isn't. So you can take a lot of training, but there's a point where you have to just listen to yourself. And then I think as your career advances, and I've probably only recently gotten to this point, I don't fucking show anybody anything. Like I'm just in my joy of writing. And I like this story. It might not ever sell. I have no idea, but
Right.
this is
I mean, you
now
have
what
to
works for
write
me.
what you like.
You,
Otherwise,
I
you'd be
mean, you can't.
miserable.
Yeah, you would not be a writer. You would be a struggler.
Yeah.
like like what you said. You go to these conferences, you take all the different components of the conference about getting published and dreaming of $1 million. But what you're not necessarily doing in that time is thinking about your story, thinking about the joy of like, I can't wait to write this scene or
Right.
whatever it is. And I do think that has to come first, and it has to be
Yeah.
innate. Don't you agree?
Oh, totally. I'm writing a book right now, and I was in a bad place for a while. I was struggling through this one thing that I was writing, and then an idea came to me, and I was like, psh, psh, and zoned in on the other one.
Yeah.
Still, the other one's there, but this one I wrote like I could see it was just coming, and I was like, this is the one that I need to be spending my time on right now. This is the next one.
So
Um,
that's what's coming out in April?
no, gosh, that's draft. That's in draft.
Oh,
April, talk about being, I wrote the first draft of Dagger Lightning in 28 days,
wow.
which has never happened again.
How many
Um,
words is it,
at the time when I finished, it was, I
Yeah.
think, 97,000.
That's Jesus.
It is now like, I think 120, 125, something like that.
Right.
But there were so many rewrites
Yeah.
because I drafted it so quickly,
Right.
which, is a thing that I do. But this is probably version 4 or 5 of the book. But I mean, when you get struck by lightning, I feel like follow the lightning if you can.
Yeah.
If you're on deadline, you have to stay with the book that you're on deadline. I just submitted book 2 last Friday.
Wow.
And so I had to stop drafting the other one to focus on
But
book 2.
Dagger of Lightning, it's not a series.
It is, hopefully.
Oh, it is. Okay. But is Dagger of Lightning related to Ghost Tamer?
No,
Okay.
Ghost Tamer
Yeah.
is its own.
Got it.
the door is open for Ghost Tamer. A lot of people ask me if there will be more, but I left it so it could be a standalone.
Yeah.
And I started playing around with a book too, but no one was really breaking down the door for it.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and I was not really, there was something in it that I couldn't work out. So I was like, rather than shove out a bad book too, I'm just going to put this aside for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got other stuff.
Wow. So you're writing a lot a day, obviously.
I I I am. It depends on the day, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I think you have a rule, right? You get down like 1,000 a day or something.
I'm an hour a day. So
Hour a day.
if I'm drafting, it's anywhere between 500 and 1,000 words.
Okay, yeah,
It could be
same.
100 words. If the hour's up, the hour's up, but it's
Right.
usually 500 to 1,000.
Well, yeah. So I kind of try to write frequently. I don't when I'm in flow and I'm having a good time with the story, I don't pay a lot of attention to word count or
Yeah.
like how much I'm going. If I'm struggling a little bit, then I start making markers of like, all right, we need to get sit in the chair and maybe put a Pomodoro on and
Right.
like
Right.
get some stuff out. But
Yeah. And my advice to writers has always been like, just how we are very different. Whatever is your calling in terms of how much you're writing a day, adhere to that. Don't try to force anything. But my main rule is, just do it every day.
yeah,
Yeah. And yes, of course, you're going to miss days. That happens.
right.
But it's the consistency. So your brain is creating those grooves of expectation of like, oh, and you might sit down and just think, but you've
Right.
shown up. And
Right.
that is
Where you
so
go back to
important.
what you wrote before and you're like, well, this was wrong.
Right.
You
Right.
fix
And
it.
for me, and sometimes I will go more than an hour, like to your point, if you're having fun, but sometimes that's the best time to stop and be like, you've got this built-in excitement about the next day. Um, One of the things that's hardest for me is ending my day by ending a chapter. Because I
Oh,
don't,
you
I don't
try and do
outline, so I
that?
don't necessarily know what's going next. So I sit down the next day, I'm like, I don't have that built-in momentum because I'm not sure what happens next.
So I like to think about if I'm not quite sure what happens next, I like to think about it on my runs, and I
Okay.
find it unlocks things.
Yeah. That's
And my therapist told me that's because running is EMDR, which
what does that mean?
was like feels so it's like a way of processing because of like vertical movement, like it helps your brain process things.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I
Huh.
felt so freaking justified. I was like, my runs are magical, everyone, and everyone's like, you're just crazy.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It's like thinking about things in the shower. It's just like it's
Yeah,
meditative.
shower is the same for
Yeah,
some reason.
yeah. Well, you're in the way that I think about it is, and I think about this about the act of writing itself. So things like running, taking a shower, writing, you are so in the present moment. Like it's forcing you to be in the present moment. And like when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about like, oh, I got to remember to do this thing later on. I'm like there. And I feel like when I run, which is not that often, I'm the same way. I'm just like, this fucking sucks. This fucking sucks. But you're in that moment. But I mean, I rarely think about my stories unless I'm like sitting there doing it.
Sometimes I make myself do it. Today, no, today I did sprints and hills and everything was horrible. But if I'm on a nice long run, I'm like, okay, you have time to unlock this. You know this happens, so let's just think it.
yeah,
And really, it happens. It
yeah,
usually like 99% of the time, something will unlock
right. As long as
if
you're
I
not
make myself think
forcing
about it
it.
while I'm running.
Yeah. And that's why I don't outline because I've tried it and I feel like when I outline, I'm forcing it through. And it's never going to be as interesting if it's structured like that from how I write.
Same. Yeah,
And
I
so
was in my first writers group was all outliners.
yeah.
And they tried because I was a baby writer and they were like, read this thing, you got to do your tent poles. And I want to be the person with the murder board of the post-its.
Yeah,
It
I
seems
don't.
so
Yeah.
cool. Like in my everyday life, I am spreadsheets, I am to-do lists,
Me
I have
too.
a bullet
Totally.
journal.
Yeah.
But when I write, I am a chaos demon. I can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to cram myself into their way of doing it. And I was absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
And then I read On Writing by
Right.
Stephen
Yeah.
King. And it's like he gave me permission to
Totally.
just write the way I wanted. And I've been much
100%.
happier ever since.
Yeah, and that's the key word is happier because that's for me. And I do recommend to aspiring writers who kind of were like you, just kind of figuring out, try different ways. Like,
Yeah.
but you're eventually going to find the thing that's organic to you, and you might be surprised because you and I are both very type A, highly organized people.
Yes.
And then I am totally a chaos demon too when it comes, but that is where the joy comes in. And it's like, I don't know what happens today, but I'm excited to find out.
Yeah.
And only through that, so I never think about what's the twist going to be. My brain will all of a sudden say, well, what if this guy just died? And I'm like, well, where did that thought come from? And I think about it. I'm like, all right, well, I'll kill him and I'll see what happens. And maybe I don't like it, but maybe it's great. But I wouldn't have
Yeah.
been able to think about that had I sat down to outline the book.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a
No, it's
freedom.
same. And sometimes I'm like, I'm with the one I'm writing now, I'm like, this, I feel like there's not enough happening. And I'm like, just finish the story
Right,
and see
right,
what happens. And then we can go back and judge.
right.
But
Totally. So I'm like you. I'm like, I tell people like, just get that first draft. Let the
yeah,
first draft. I even have it on my little bracelet here. Trust the story. Trust the story that's somewhere in your head that's coming out and you think is shitty. And just get it all down because the hardest thing to do is to finish that draft, right? That is the
right.
hardest part. But editing's a lot of work, but that's where you start scraping the clay off and seeing what's underneath. And that's exciting too. But
I
you'll
feel like when you first get feedback, it's like, meh. But then you're like, wait,
yeah,
that actually that would be really cool.
yeah.
Like after you sleep. And then it is super exciting. But I agree. The favorite, I don't remember who I heard this from, but my one of my favorite quotes is you can fix anything but the blank page.
Totally. And that's 100. And it's also a skill to learn how to accept that feedback. Like, and now I'm talking higher level feedback. I'm talking
Yeah.
agent feedback. I'm talking editor feedback. And it is hard, but we talk about this all the time about that editorial letter that is like a couple paragraphs of what they liked and 5 single-space pages of what you might want to think about.
Yeah.
And you look at it and it's totally overwhelming. And then you look at it critically, you're like, you should get excited. I can't wait to make this book better because when you turn in a book, it is the best effort that you have at that moment in your
Yeah.
life. And to say it's the best effort, the best that can be done is stupid because we change
Right.
all the time. And so you should be excited about it. And yeah, I've had books that it's taken me 4 to 5 months to go through. I've changed entire tenses of the entire book, and it's a lot of work, but you're like, it's better now. It's a better
Yeah.
book, and that's what matters. And at some point, you have to let it go.
Right.
But it's
I always like sleep on it because 50% of the time when they point something out, it's something that I kind of knew was a problem, but was hoping I
right,
could get away with.
right. I know, but that's so important to have that instinct and intuition. Like you just said, you're writing a draft and you have this creeping sense of like not enough is happening. This character needs to go out into the world and you finish the draft, and then what I'll do is I'll have a little Word document that's just called scrap. That's just thoughts. I'll go over to that, and it's just a chaotic document that it's just a mess. And I'll write maybe needs around chapter 40. I had the sense things need to happen more, and just have that
Oh,
there.
nice.
And as I'm going back through it, because I'll forget these thoughts.
Okay.
And that's when I go back and look and say like, oh yeah. And then I might be like, no, I'm okay now. I don't think
Yeah.
I need to, but that was a thought I had. And that's all important. But at some point you get too close to it and you're like, I don't know. Now I need help.
Yeah. That's like one of the things, it's one of the first things I learned is you can't get better in a vacuum. Like
Right.
when I went to that writing conference and I got shut down, but I was like, this feedback is magical.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. But it's funny. I've gotten to the point now with drafting, and I've said this on the last couple of episodes, like the draft that I just finished, nobody knows what it's about because I didn't tell anyone. My agent
Right.
knows the title. That's it. And I'm not trying to be coy about it, but I'm just like, I don't know where the story's going,
Do
and
you
the whole thing
figure
takes
out your
place.
title before you finish your draft? That is amazing to me.
No, the title came last, but that's the only thing I ever
Oh,
shared with her.
okay.
I shared with her that the title, and I shared with her that the whole story takes place in 6 hours. So,
Ooh,
but when I was writing this thing, I'm like, do I have enough here to write? Because it all takes place so quickly. So I didn't want to tell anybody. And then I only looked back once, like about halfway through, to read what I had written because I was just simply forgetting parts of the book. And then I didn't read it again until I was fully done. And that was
right.
just the most organic, just this is what happens. And of course, it's a mess and it needs a lot of work, but it was just the most organic way of writing and the most joyful way of writing. I'm like, I have no idea if anyone's going to like this. I know there's problems in it. I know I have suspicions about what my agent might say. I think it's a good book, but you never know. Um,
Right.
but
But I feel like if you're enjoying writing it, that's another thing that I always tell people when I'm teaching is like if you're bored writing it, people are going to be bored reading it.
totally,
So I definitely
totally.
feel like following the joy is the right thing to do, at least when you're drafting.
Yeah. Especially if you're leaning more towards thriller suspense, like that pace needs to be
Right.
there.
There's
Uh,
a reason why and then later was invented as a phrase.
right,
Like,
right, exactly. So if you're reading your own stuff and you're editing and you find yourself reading it the way that you might read somebody else's book that you're not crazy into, that you're just kind of skimming parts of, that's a red flag. Pay
yeah,
attention to that. And the instinct is to be lazy about it. And like you just said, you're hoping to get away with something, or that that awful comment in your head of like, it's good enough. That
right.
scene's good enough. Like, no, challenge yourself. Is
I
it
mean,
good
it can be
enough?
good enough for now,
Right,
but you
right.
know you're going to have to go back.
It can be a placeholder.
Yes,
I mean, I've
exactly.
had that same thing, like you just said, where that sense of not enough is happening, or like I feel like my character's being like she's failing a lot. She's weak, or I can see how she could be perceived as weak, even though to me, I'm like, I think
Right,
this is highly realistic in this kind of situation.
right.
And I'm like, have her do something that's not necessarily heroic, but that is pushing herself beyond what she's already shown. And she can still fail, but she should
Right.
be trying.
I
Um,
heard this great thing last night. I went to a book opening for Bridget Krimmer and Heather Witten. Um, and they said one of them said, I can't remember which one said it, was Hannah Witten, sorry, not Heather. Um, think of what your character is going to do next, not what is going to happen next. Which I was like,
yeah,
yes, because I tend to have a problem with things happening to my character
yeah.
and then they're just kind of
They have
reacting.
no agency.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And then I have to go put the agency in. So I was like, oh, I'm going to write that down and put it on my computer. What
totally.
are they going to do next, not what is going to happen
I mean,
next?
that's fantastic. I think that's also very dependent on what point of view you write. So I tend to write from a single point of view, first
Yeah,
person present tense. So it's like you're in their shoes. So I'm in their shoes. So I'm constantly saying, what would I do? And then I add
right.
like 50% more bravery to whatever, yeah, I would do. And then that's the answer because you want to exaggerate it. But so it's easier for me to always think, what are they going to do?
Yeah, I'm usually in first person past.
Yeah, but you're still first person. So I think that is
Yeah,
easier to do that. If you're doing this omniscient, that's why I'm not good at that because I feel like then this shit's just happening and I'm not really getting visceral into my story at all. It's just not
right.
my I kind of made the decision that had the revelation that finding the point of view and the tense that flows out of you the most is synonymous with finding your voice. Um,
Oh,
because
interesting.
it happened to me. I'm probably on my fifth book was by the time that's when I really went first person present tense, single
Okay.
character, and I'm just like this. It just is coming out of me, and it's just the easiest way for me to write. It's the most natural way. I'm like, I think this is my voice. However you want to define that, but this sounds like how I should be writing.
Yeah,
So
okay.
yeah, I
That's what,
don't
because
know.
I've tried to write books and there's books that I've been like, I don't know what tense I want to do. And I'll try different things. I've done one book in third person, which it hasn't sold yet, but it has two POVs, so maybe that's why. But I always end up in first person present or first person past. Maybe I should just stop fighting it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. So my last book, Father She Went to Find, my draft was third person past because the character was a 21-year-old female who's not autistic, but she's brilliant, and just she's a savant, so different than me. I'm like, I don't think I can get close enough to this person, and I fucked up. I didn't listen to my instincts, and I made her more distant.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, I
so it
can
was
see
just
that.
not connecting with my editor. And so I rewrote 20 pages first person present. She's like, oh, there she is. And I'm like, oh shit.
I had to rewrite the whole thing.
But that was a huge lesson for me. I'm like, trust your instincts. You've been doing this long enough. Trust your instincts. That doesn't mean you're going to be right. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but
Right.
trust your instincts because it's the doubt that pushes you away from the readers. I think people, when they read you, they're reading your instincts, I think. And when you read a book that you don't feel is an instinctual book, it feels very two-dimensional. It feels very like structured and organized and emotionless to me, at least.
Yeah, no.
So I don't know. And I see that a lot with the aspiring writers, like first drafts of like, it looks like you took a lot of courses on how to do this, but it doesn't look like
Yeah.
you're listening to your soul on this.
That was another thing that was said last night is like people will try to get it technically right and they write their voice right out of it.
Right.
It's like
Right.
just write it, just get it down first and then go
Totally.
back and
Because plot is super important. I talk about this all the time. Plot and character development is super important, but it really, for me, it's got to be emotion first.
yeah.
Like every page, it has to be, how is my character feeling? And that doesn't mean I'm saying it on every page or displaying it on every page, but I'm checking in with her. And because if that emotion isn't there, then why would the reader give a shit about what happens to her, whether they like her or not?
So
They
do you
should
think
be
your
invested.
character first or plot first?
Character for sure. So I'll have an idea either for a general story, but it's never that because I never know my ending. It'll just
Right.
be kind of the hook is what I'll think of, or I'll just think of a first chapter of like, I don't know what this chapter means, but it's intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to figure out what happens after that. But with that, I have an idea about who this character is, and I have no idea about the plot, and it just slowly unfolds
Do you
as
ever have like an idea of what you think? You're sitting down, you're like, I'm going to write this chapter and I have a good idea of what we're going to do. And then your characters come in like D&D players and are like, actually,
yeah.
I want to go over here.
Totally, totally. And I think it's always a little precious to say, like, oh, I just sit back and let my characters dance. But I remember one of the times I tried outlining, I opened up the book, I wrote that first chapter, and this guy's driving on the Beltway going to work. And I'm writing this scene. I'm like, he kind of seems like an asshole to me. And this is my main guy. And asshole's okay, but I want him to be a little bit likable. So off
Right.
outline, I'm just like, okay, he's going to stop and help a stranded motorist. And he gets out of the car. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, there's no way he doesn't get hit by a car. He has to, like, that just came like, of course he gets hit by a car. So he got hit by a car. And then that completely blew up my outline. Like it changed the course of the book. So I threw my
Yeah.
outline away. I'm like, listen to your instinct. And that doesn't mean it's going to be right. It's just going to mean
Right.
listen. You're listening to what your subconscious is telling you. Trust it. And you can always go back later if it's not working. But I think that's where the best storytelling comes from is just that subconscious instinct. I don't know.
No,
I
I
could be fucking
completely
wrong
agree.
too. So, so is anything changing with your second book coming out? Or do you feel like, I know this is potentially the first in a series, but do you feel like the process that you're going through launching the second book, does it feel any different than the first? Do you feel like maybe you're getting a little bit more attention from the publisher? Because I know that's an existential thing too. It's like,
Yeah. It's a lot different because my publisher got sold.
yeah, I wasn't going to bring up this whole thing with Camcat because I know a lot, or I've heard a lot about it. So please,
But yeah, so spring 2025, which is me, is going to be the first group of books that are released by CamCat under the Baker and Taylor umbrella.
yeah,
And so but they bought, the official sale was done in November, and we just didn't know what was going to happen. We were told they wanted the books and they wanted to keep publishing, so we were like, yay. But there was a period of time where I was like, am I going to have a book?
right. Were they
Much
keeping the
less am I going to have a
editors?
series. What was that?
Were they keeping the editors?
They let everyone go except
Uh,
for one editor. My editor for Ghost Tamer died during this process, which was
oh,
also it was I've had a very bad year.
that
But
was
yeah,
your
so
editor. Okay, yeah, I know. I heard about that, and I saw a million posts, and that's very unexpected, right? Very
yeah, she was dealing with cancer, but she was on the upswing.
yeah.
And so it was like just a sudden,
Oh.
we were like, wait, what? Like we talked to her 2 days before,
Was
and
she
then
not one of the founders also?
yeah, she was
Yeah,
one of the very first
yeah.
people. So
Wow.
I'm sure they would have kept her.
Yeah,
But they kept the other editor who was my editor for Dagger of Lightning and the money guy.
yeah.
And they let everyone else go, and including marketing. And so I was kind of like, marketing is important. I have
Yeah,
a book coming out.
yeah,
And so I was trying not to be pushy, but I was also like, okay, it's the holidays, we'll give them. And I'm like, okay, it's January. Okay, it's like when am I getting my marketing meeting? My book comes out in April. Um, Finally had a marketing meeting. Like they brought some people back. So yeah, the process has been totally different because I meanwhile was like, I need to do something because I'm very anxious. And so and controlling. So I
totally.
started developing like an ARC team on Instagram on my own, which is something new that I've never done.
That's a lot of work.
And
Yeah,
yeah, so I'm doing that and I've got my release party set up with Parnassus and it feels a little less like yay this year and more like, all right, check this box,
right.
this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's also true under any circumstances about going from debut to book two, right?
yeah,
Because now you're like, oh shit, this is kind of a career. This isn't just a, because there's that sense of like, I wrote this book, I can, die happy now. And now you're like, no, I'm in this for the long game.
yeah.
And this is a business. And of course, I'm going to celebrate the launch of my second book. But it is like, all right, what can we do to make this one a little bit bigger? What can we do to, you know,
Right.
if this
And
one doesn't
meanwhile,
win an
it's like,
award,
all
what am I
right,
going
I've
to
got to
do?
get book two in by this time because I
Right,
want it to launch this date.
right.
And I also want to draft so I can put something on submission. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And for the listener, just, a typical marketing plan does start, 6 months before
yeah,
the book launch. And I've gone to know a lot about it because I have a great marketing team and then I hire my own PR marketing team as well. And they all work together and I get involved. And so I've learned a lot. It's, it's a lot. I
I
mean,
still don't really quite understand it. And
yeah,
especially with TikTok being in, TikTok being out.
right.
And, I'm like, I felt like I would know more about marketing, but I still feel like I know more of what to ask for
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Like they were like, do you want help booking events? And I'm like, yes, here are some places that I would like you to look at, and here's some media places that I would like you to look at.
yeah,
And I didn't know all that stuff
totally.
last time.
Totally. Or what are the efficacy? What's the efficacy of these events? Does it
Right,
matter? And because
right.
I've been
Like
on tour,
op-eds. I'm
I
like, I don't know what op-eds really do for me,
right, right,
you know?
totally, yeah. But sometimes you'd be surprised because I even remember like I went on tour once and like very few people were showing up and my publisher was paying for everything and I asked my editor, I'm like, happy to do this, of course, but I
Right.
just don't see that, this is costing you more than it's bringing in. Like it's about the relationship with the booksellers. I'm like, oh, I had never thought of that. That never crossed. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect
Ah,
sense to me.
good. That
So
makes me feel good because I created my own little mini tour. So it's like I'm booking a tour
right,
with like where I can drive, and everyone was like, that doesn't sell books. And I'm like, look, I want a tour.
right. Well, and it's
I
good
want
for
the
you.
experience. So I'm
Yeah,
having
yeah.
one.
I think having the experience is great because not a lot of people are great at being an event person. They're not great at they do a reading and they hide behind their book and that's you know, learning how to public speak and all that
Yeah.
stuff is so great because so much of the business is like any other business. It's that networking. It's who you know, and they will think and remember you. Oh, she was great when she came here.
Right.
That's even if 5 people showed up, we really enjoyed her. We loved the book. That stuff adds up.
Right.
But it's, and just also the idea of like getting what I've learned over time and what I've gleaned from my marketing teams is that getting the book into the right hands early. And that means, Instagram account, bookstagrammers that have 10,000
Right.
plus followers. You still have to have this great book. That's like the minimum thing you have to
Right.
do because you want them saying good things about it because they get books all the time. But I've learned with especially with this book that just came out yesterday, it's like that can make a big difference. It's if they love the book and they've
Right.
got a loud voice and your publisher has made sure they all had a copy 3 to 4 months ago, because then when they go try to sell to Target and Barnes and Noble, there might be a buzz already about the book. But it's hard. And you never know
Yeah.
how it's going to be. And there's only so far you can take it. And then the universe has to step in,
Yeah, pretty much.
which is
Yeah,
also
especially
free
if you're
too.
small press, it's kind of like you can do what you can do.
But it's the same with bigger presses too. Everyone's stretched. My marketing, like that's why I always hire my own PR. My source books marketing is amazing. They are amazing, amazing, amazing. But they also have, Freedom
Yeah, they're growing.
McFadden. Freedom McFadden is the same imprint as me, and so the same marketing people. So I'm like, they're stretched thin because they're really trying to get those books to sell. So that's just the reality of publishing. So you do have to do a lot of stuff yourself or hire people to do it, whatever.
Yeah, last for Ghost Tamer, I hired someone. I didn't have it in the budget this year, which was unfortunate, but yeah, because I didn't know what I was doing too,
Right,
which
right.
it's funny. I worked in acquisitions for a hot second, and you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, how many people they had a question on what's your marketing plan, and how many people wrote, I wrote the book, you sell it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not how it works anymore.
No, you
I
got
don't
to
know if it
be
ever
a team
really worked
player.
that way.
Right. And if you have that attitude, they might not even want to buy your next book because like, yeah, it's a good book, but you're a pain in the
Yeah.
ass. Why do I
But are
want to
you
work
going
with
to
you?
even put an effort in?
Right. Right.
Even the
Yeah.
people who were like, I'm not really sure what to do, but I'm happy to do whatever the marketing team tells me to do, were like better than like,
Yeah.
I just wrote the book.
Right. No. Say yes to everything that's asked of you.
Yes, especially as a debut.
Yeah,
Yes to
totally.
everything.
Well, Meredith, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do our own little storytelling.
Oh my God, I've heard about this and I'm
This
excited.
is the making it up part of the show. I've chosen 3 books, not quite at random, but 3 books from my bookshelves. I'm going to have you
Okay.
choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read
Okay.
that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in maybe a 2 or 3 minute long short story. I'll read that sentence. You give me the next sentence or two, whatever comes to your mind. So, talk about improv.
Yay, I'm
That
excited.
whole yes and kind of a thing. So the only commonality these books have is I just saw them next to each other and they all have the word murder in the title. So I have Matt Goldman's The Murder Show, which actually comes out in April, like yours. Kristen Perrin's How to Solve Your Own Murder. And Stuart Turton's The Last Murder at the End of the World.
Ooh, I want that one.
It's a great book.
Sounds
I've been talking it up a lot. He came out to Boulder on a tour, and I interviewed him at the Boulder Bookstore. And he's great. He's hysterical. So give me a page between 1 and 340.
78.
Okay. So I'm going to quickly scan page 78. It's the beginning of a chapter. Um, it's just a piece of dialogue. So I'm going to read this and you do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
This is a bad idea, I warn.
Which makes it the very best idea, she responded.
I knew she was going to say that. My sister and I have always been different in terms of how much risk we've been willing to take. But this wasn't even about risk anymore. This was about going to prison for the rest of our lives.
Yes, I love the stakes. But listen, once we get in, I swear, I've studied the schematics. I will be able to break us out and anyone we want to take with us, which includes Luigi, our brother.
Luigi. I kept reminding myself that this has to be about Luigi. If I keep him at the forefront of my mind, maybe I can use this gun. maybe I can use this knife. I've never even killed a spider, but now I might have to do much worse than that.
Just trust me. It's all going to be fine. Everything is going to go exactly according to plan.
She barely got that last syllable out when my sister's head separated right along the seam of her forehead, and a chunk of her skull flew back and hit my shoulder. I barely had time to process what had happened when her body just collapsed to the ground. We can call it there if you want.
I feel like that's the end of the chapter.
So that's about leaving the chapter on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. I love doing that.
I don't know. Maybe I'm in a mood. Maybe I just needed to see somebody's skull separate.
Somebody's going to prison.
I'm a firm believer in not employing a lot of violence, but when I do, it's like it's real.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, fantasy has a lot of violence.
Yeah, that's probably true. I like the constant threat of violence. And I'm the same way with sex. I very rarely write a sex scene because it has to be meaningful. It has to be real. It has to propel the story. And a lot of times it doesn't.
I actually teach a course on writing action scenes. And if they let me, I call it From Fighting to Forking, because writing them is very similar.
Totally. 100%. And be real about it, like just... what drives me nuts is the fight scenes where, or even, you can have I get the suspension of disbelief, but, you get punched in the face. That's a big deal. And that's the most minimal thing that happens. I have a book called On Writing Violence. And this guy's an ex-prison warden who's seen everything. And he's like, this is what happens to the human body when you get punched in the face, when you get shot in the shoulder. Like, these are all the things that you have to think about to make it real. And it's so important. Somebody punches me in the face, I'm down for a week.
Right.
And so if you're writing the everyday character, you have to you have to honor that. And you could take liberties, but you can't. Somebody gets shot in the leg, they're not running away.
Right.
So.
You have to, and the next day is what I always tell people, like, don't forget the next day. Like, if there was a fight, especially if someone died, like, what kind of morality does your character have? Did they just kill someone for the first time?
Right.
Like, what are they thinking when they stare in the mirror in the morning? Are there aches? Like, maybe just something when they get out of bed. Right.
Oh, I love to throw a good panic attack at a character who's never had one before. And it's just like everything that's been pent up and they've been just getting through on adrenaline. And when that goes away and the panic and reality creeps in, that's a visceral physical reaction. And I love that because it's like, I think it's real. I think it's what happens. So. Well, listen, so good to talk to you, to catch up, and I'm excited about your April release. And are you doing the conference circuit again? Maybe BoucherCon in New Orleans?
I've applied for things. I am not doing Thriller Fest this year because I'm doing a fantasy, and New York is expensive, and I'm currently...
New York is expensive. Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
But I am going to do some conferences. I just like them. I like doing them. I've got my little tour in April, my little mini tour.
Yep.
So awesome. I'm excited about that.
Well, congratulations, and congratulations on all the success with your debut. And I'm looking forward to our paths crossing again.
Yes. Thank you so much. It was fun to catch up.
All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Meredith Lyons, and very violent, because of me, a very violent little storytelling there, but I guess it was my mood. Please go check out Meredith's work. You can see everything, read about her books and her new book coming out, A Dagger of Lightning, at her website, which is meredithlyons.com. Ray is R-A-E, Meredith Ray Lyons, Lyons.com. And while you're on the internet, pop on over to carterwilson.com, check out my new book, Tell Me What You Did, and then you can head on over to unboundwriter.com and check out my offerings in terms of online courses, one-on-one coaching for writing, as well as any retreats or seminars I might be offering. That is it, friends. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Thank you, as always, for watching and or listening. I always appreciate it. Another episode out just next week. In the meantime, take care.